Hey guys, John Lee here. Welcome to Game of the Week 6. This is a series that I'm trying to revive where I basically choose a game during the week that has some interesting points, often some original positions, and we go through it and analyse it without the pressure of live play. So the game I'm going through today is against Suwanet, which I've just played recently. In fact, yeah, I'm still on holidays. It's just been yesterday that we played this, so I'll get into it. It's got some interesting points in opening, where I think both of us are lost fairly early, and I do get a lot of questions around opening and what should be done, how it should be played, and what I, you know, those who have watched the channel long enough will know that I try to avoid familiarity, and I like to play unfamiliar positions and also get my opponent into unfamiliar positions. So here's a fine example: D4, B5. I mean, already B5. I don't think I've played against. So we just have to work out, what are some principles. How do you play an opening if you get lost? Because you'll find that I get lost frequently. So I'm going to take you through some opening principles, some interesting middle game play, and how to finish a winning position as well. So that's what this game should provide. Okay, so look, Bishop B7's been played. This pawn's hanging, but in return, Black would get this. White's got some options here. White can defend E4. You can play Bishop D3. That's quite natural looking. There's F3, which is quite common. This pawn stack up against this bishop. It's usually good for avoiding a potential attack later. Knight c3 also possible, but that kind of allows b4, which seems to be the point of black taking this move order. Look, if something like bishop d3 or f3, I think black can continue with a6 just to hold on to this. And this is now more familiar territory for both players. This is been played quite often, I suppose. So in my nature, I decide I'm going to grab the pawn on b5, just to ensure both of us don't really know what we're doing. And then f3 is played, so I still get this structure here up against this bishop on the diagonal. And now knight h3, and I'm going to talk a little bit about knight h3 because it's not a natural looking move. And in chess, pardon me, one of the principles you'd learn is you don't put knights on the side because it only has half the squares that are available to it. Normally you like a knight in the center where it would have 8 squares. So yeah, why h3 and not e2? Now in Crazy House, this is quite a useful defender. It covers f2. F4 is sometimes useful square. G5 is sometimes useful for launching attacks. And in fact, I'd like to think that in this situation it may actually be beneficial to put on h3 rather than e2. The other things to note when choosing when to put a knight on h3 or not is actually where this bishop is, this light squared bishop. It's not on c8 like it normally is, so it's not going to hit anytime soon. You've got a pawn here guarding g4, so it's not likely to get hit. And in fact, in playing knight h3, already my idea here is white, not knowing this opening, but my general strategy is I want to try to castle and basically say that I've got a pretty good fortress over here. I've got a lead in development, and I want to get active, get open, start attacking the king as soon as possible. So e6 was played, castles, knight f6, knight c3. So yeah, knight c3, not knight d2 because that would block your bishop. So that's just a natural looking move. The only unusual moves here are probably f3 and knight h3 so far. But you can already see here white looks like he has an edge in development, and it's really just because black's had to spend 3 moves on this bishop already, whereas white's developed quite freely. So bishop b4, bishop g5. So yeah, I mean, you could try to make bishop b4 look silly by playing something like knight e2. You could consolidate the d4 square. You could swing this knight to g3 or f4 to the king side. But like I said, my strategy is I'm just going to try to play open, play actively, and establishing another pin and almost completing development seems like a good idea. Okay, so here's where things get interesting. Now, black's already a couple moves down in development, and black's played h6. So here's where you have to decide if you're going to back the bishop off, which is playable as well. You may get hit later by g5 if that's attractive for black. If you come back to a square like e3, you're probably giving up some tempo. Knight d5 comes in, starts hitting some things. Apologies, pieces are moving back and forward because the connection's not very good. And here I feel like, well, black's probably getting some of the tempi back in the opening, and I'm not keen on giving away the developmental advantage I have at the moment. So yeah, I hope that helps you, the audience, understand what I'm thinking here in this opening, even though I've never seen it before. I'm formulating a strategy first on how I'm going to play, and then executing on that. So save king, let's play actively. So I'm trading off here, and at this point, I was contemplating maybe knight at e4. So a very common thing is when there's an open queen, and it applies in chess as well, you try to make use of it by hitting it to gain some more tempo. And there's got to be a balance between hitting it in a useful way and hitting it in a way that probably helps your opponent. So look, there's lots of options. There's knight at h5, there's knight at e4, knight at g4, knight e4, pawn at e5. And here's where you might say, well, how do you choose? All these moves look like they're progressing in some way, when in fact in my mind I'm really only thinking of one of two options. It's either knight at e4 or knight to e4. My immediate thought is knight at e4, so that if the bishop takes, I have another knight to follow. Reasons for not taking one of the others, I suppose knight at h5 is another natural looking one, but yeah, I felt after queen g6, I got a hit on the queen, but he gets a hit on my knight, and normally this would be quite nice, but I think there's a bishop at e3 check. We capture this. Queen goes to f5 now. It's hitting the knight again. And it doesn't really look like white's gained anything there. If anything, white's getting hit. And now even if you just defend the knight, there's some tactics like bishop takes the knight. And black can even grab a free bishop over here. So I didn't feel like that was helping me out too much. Knight at g4, another possibility. I suppose the black queen can just back off. And I feel like this knight's just going to get in the way of getting hit with h5 later without having much immediate benefit. Lastly, pawn at e5, which isn't so bad. Maybe queen h4 is appropriate. Bishop at e3 is coming. A check might pick off the pawn. There's not a real good way of hitting that queen at the moment. So okay, so that was a fair bit of time spent on determining why certain moves could be played against a queen or not. I opted for knight e4 in the end because it steps out of the way of the bishop. And what I might do is follow the main line. Makes this bishop look a bit silly. If there is a capture, I get another hit on the queen. this is quite natural. Because of the defense of this knight, I'm not too concerned about things like bishop e3. I can either guard with f2 or even shuffle the king back. If black did that, there'd be a hole on b7, pawn at b7 to hit. So I feel that what this does is, without me actually expending a pawn or a knight, I can keep these in reserve to attack with later, or choose a more optimal position depending on where this queen moves. Yeah, it's really just a little bit of efficiency on using these pieces. So I hope that makes sense to the viewers. Okay, Queen G6 played. Now Queen G6 is logical. It puts some pressure here. In fact, it's not a bad idea covering the h5 square, because what you'll find can happen is if black plays what looks like a sensible move, Queen e7, sometimes there can be some pressure that can build with knight at h5 here. You know, this isn't the best defensive move, rook g8, but you can quickly see something like pawn at h7 or pawn at f6. White's starting to make some progress here. I mean, maybe black can play f6 here. That might be a better idea. Yeah, pawn at e5 looks natural as well. It's not awful, but Queen g6 is quite active. Okay, so here is a difference where I've played the knight to e4, so I've got a knight in hand. And what that means is I can now attack this queen again. And here I decide knight at e5. And the reasoning for that is this is a nice natural attacking square. It's a good central space. Everything's defended. So another point is, when you put a piece on the board, it's nice if they're already defended, because so often there are tactics where your opponent may pick up loose pieces. So it's nice to have them in positions where they're already defended. Currently, my only real piece of concern that's not defended is this bishop, which might get hit later. So Queen h5, and pardon me, the queen's now basically looking for space to move. And there's a number of ways to proceed here. If you keep chasing the queen, you actually run out of pieces. And g3 unfortunately doesn't trap the queen because this knight is hanging. And then white without pieces now allows black later to penetrate with bishop at e3 or make other moves. White doesn't actually have anything direct on the black king just yet. Another option could have been knight g3, which is looking quite reasonable. I didn't see this in the game, with the idea that after queen h4, pawn at g6 could be quite nice for white. And that's basically, threatening f7. If capture, got a fork on the rook and the queen. I think that's also quite playable. Okay, so here is where I actually stop for a bit and think, well, maybe I've got the queen in a spot that I want it. And the way I look at this is where the black king is as well. And if you think about it, if I had a knight in hand, I could play knight at f6. So in hindsight, already looking at it, a move like bishop d7 could be considered, with the idea of king takes, knight at f6 would win the queen. That's quite nice. Hang on, let me just get that on the board. I think after this, because there's two knights hitting f6, black has to either move the queen or the king to get out of the way, and a move like castles might be appropriate. So that just breaks all the forks all at once. Suddenly the knight's hanging. And yeah, there's still a game to play here. I think it still looks reasonable for black. But But yeah, that's just one tactic or one way of thinking. So rather than hit the queen again, I'm now thinking, how do I exploit the positions of the king and the queen? The way I did in the game was trying to play pawn at f6. Which obviously, so black wouldn't want to capture because I'd get the knight in there. What it does though is it's trying to remove the defender of f6 for the knight to step in. It's also quite threatening to the back rank. So a move like this, just removing the bishop, means there's still an open line here. If black chooses to do the trades, yeah, it's pretty dicey. There's a lot going on the back. Maybe you could take this, but I much prefer the white pieces here. How to proceed? Because white has to be careful as well. There's a rook g2 sack, which can open things up. I think I'd like something like a queen at c8, which threatens bishop d7, knight d7, queen d7. If black chooses to block with the queen, then I'm basically safe from this rook g2 threat now, because it's not much unless black holds a queen, and I can just make black stew a little bit by putting a pawn on b7, which now makes queen takes queen a real threat, or later there could be an attack on the rook. Black chooses not to block with the queen, then we make progress this way. Yeah, this would be hanging. This is not much better because of the check. So knight takes, and then rook f7 is pretty deadly. So yeah, I just feel from here with the queen trade it should favour white, because white just has attacks on so many points. There's a weakness here, and white's quite safe back at home. Okay, so what to do against pawn at f6? So I like the move Swiatek played, which is just bishop at f8. And what that does is it just says, well, if you're going to take me, I'm going to replace it with another diagonal piece. If you try pawn at f6 again, well, then I can back the bishop off, and you've actually blocked your own attacking square where you wanted to put the knight. So this is quite a nice defensive idea by black. The bishops are very good defenders in Crazy House. Knights usually quite good attackers, quite poor defenders. But each piece has its benefit. So it's back here. I think it's only now I started realizing some more of the tricks on d7. In fact, I nearly made the mistake of playing knight takes d7, which looks natural because you want to have a bishop checking the king afterwards. The problem is black can capture this bishop, and I was referring to this bishop as the only undefended piece on the board before. And when I mentioned it, it didn't look like black was anywhere near capturing it, but these tactics occur in this game. And it's for that reason, aside from the tactics also working out, that I took it with the bishop. And now, what this actually does, it just disguises the same knight f6 idea. It's just a little bit less obvious for black to pick up. Because what happened in the game is he took the knight on e4. And usually, as black here, you'd like to keep the knight here if you have the option to take another knight, because this is a bit like a friend to the king. It actually helps defend the black king. This is a knight that white has to remove and spend a tempo on in order to get the attack going again quite often. The key difference here is f takes g7 suddenly opens up this attack, and also the f6 square. Knight at f6 is possible. Even if the king takes, the knight's there. You can't defend f6 by doing this because the knight's attacking. So in this case, the knight's actually more useful in d7, but it's a rarity. Normally, a knight next to a king is a friend for the king in Crazy House. So before I go further, I mean, the other idea was to also repeat with castles. I think the only difference here is that white's played this, and black's played this, and I think in this case it actually helps white, because now white has a way of disposing of this knight while grabbing some material. To defend g7, I think black might take that way. And there's options again. There's pawn at e7, which doesn't look too bad. Even something like maybe a capture, and then a move like pawn at c6 just to open up the king. See, white's got a lot of defense here, so white can afford to give up a little bit of material to try to open the king. Simple idea just being, draw the king out this way. Still plenty of play in this position. Queen d3 looks natural. I'm going to try to get queen a6 or coordinate with bishop at a4. It's still a game from here, but I think I think castles is probably still best against this knight d7 idea. It's just not obvious, and Suwana played bishop takes e4 because I expect he didn't anticipate this f takes g7 idea. So I think he thought a while here, and yeah, I figure he thought, well, no matter what move I play here, I'm losing material. Even if I castle here, I'm now starting to lose this rook, and white gets queen for free. So he started playing some checks. So I think here it's already getting quite decisive. Now white still needs to be careful. So white could just go, I've got plenty of defense here. I'll go king h1, and I think something like queen takes h3 actually becomes quite dangerous, and perhaps this is what he was looking at. Now the immediate threat is knight at g3, so you should be taking this. There's some checks as well that could be played, but let's just go through this. Pawn at g2. King g2. No, maybe I could be wrong. For some reason I thought black had another piece in hand, but it's actually quite safe. This isn't getting mated. No, you can't take with the rook. That doesn't really help black because this will end up getting mated. No, maybe okay. Maybe white's okay just playing king h3. I'm seeing if there's another way to get a pawn for black. No, I think it's actually okay. So maybe white is really solid. I decided I was going to play on the safe side and just play pawn f2. And what that does is it just keeps everything together. If queen h3 is played, there's just nothing happening on the white king. Okay, so pawn f2, bishop takes f3, and there's probably a little bit of desperation here. I mean, black's basically trying to commit to an attack, and so here it's time for white to pick up some material. So knight f6. You could put the new knight on or use the old knight. My feeling is that if you just use the new knight, king d8, and again, this is actually not helping white because it'd be better if that was vacant and if white had another knight in hand to use. So knights are very good attackers, but not this close to the king. They're better attacking from range. So I'm moving this knight back. King e7, knight takes queen. Black's taking the queen just to try to stay up with material. And then already here, maybe there is a finish with a mate. I didn't see it in the game. I just felt the black king had a lot of spaces to run to, and so just being practical, I made a fairly quick decision that my king's not in any immediate danger of being mated by force. Knight at f3, knight at e2 checks, or bishop f2, I didn't really feel were going anywhere. So I just said, I'm going to grab the rook, get another queen on the board, and I should have enough material to finish black here. So bishop takes knight, and here it's how do we finish this black king. So you've got a whole host of material here, much safer king. Already here, you should be evaluating the position as winning for white. There should be a way for white to win. So it's just about being resourceful with what we have. So what's key in, I think, making use of the pieces you have is when you've got a queen on the board like this, you want to see how you can get that queen involved. And looking at it now, maybe one of the sharpest ways to go about it is just to offer this queen. It is a fake queen after all, it's been promoted on h8. There's a nice mating net here where we're basically just trying to get the king blocked off from this side, because here's where the king would be more difficult to mate. So now knight at g8 blocks off that square, blocks off that square, and with the black king shepherded on this side, it's much harder. So if he runs this way, you've got plenty of material to mate black. If he goes up, then he's running towards your forces. So again, this would be mate by the same fashion. Look at h8 to finish. If after this one, pawn f3, queen g3. And then that would push the king out this side, but then you'd still have plenty, because this queen's also attacking here. It can just become a queen that's available to sacrifice to help round up the king. Queen d8, king b7, queen at c6. I didn't see that in the game, but I just went for knight c6. Now my idea is, ideally I want this knight here hitting a king on d7. That's pretty much it. If the king was to come to d6, I've got queen e5. Capture would be taken here. So you can see there's a lot of mating patterns. I'm not going to go through all of them, but king e8 was played, pawn at d7, knight e5, and he did try to run out to the side. And here's where you could kind of actually nearly let black go if you choose the wrong check. So if you choose a check like this, knight at d8, queen d7, king b7, suddenly the checks are drying up, and you're giving black an opportunity to defend again. So the way my mind thinks here is, well, b7 is what I want to cut off. I can't cut it off with queen at a6 because I think I need more pieces. This would still work actually. Queen f8 works, but I chose a different order. I just said, I want to block off b7, queen takes f8, bishop at a6, and that just blocks that. This is defended. King can't step either way because the queen will mate. Block. Really straightforward. Queen at d7, king b8, rook at c8. Just waiting for my connection to come back. So yeah, in fact, yeah, black resigned here. So I thought that was an interesting game to show to the channel, mainly for the points in the opening and the middle game. I think this knight d7 idea is not so common, but quite nice, hitting f6. I hope you got some points out of what to do with a queen in the open, how to chase it, when it might actually be the right time to stop chasing it. In this case, it was because I saw that a fork was possible, and also generally just much earlier, way back, opening strategy here is once this position was reached, I decided, well, I'm going to blockade the king and get active. You can see that's exactly what happened. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up there. So I do hope to keep up with the weekly frequency of Game of the Week, as I've so called it. It's been more like game of every 2 months, based on how often I've done it. So yeah, I'm heading back to Australia shortly. I'm going to attempt to play in the weekly Crazy Ass event. So I hope to see you then. Alright, take care.